which we're from. We represent Northern Lower Peninsula. If you take off the word peninsula and you see that line right above it, we're kind of above there, all the way through the Upper Peninsula, across, I think it's the St. Mary's River to Ontario, where it says of Michigan on this map. And then if you take this large area on the Ontario map and maybe extend it to maybe a circle around Elliott, that might explain our catchment area. So we're a huge area. Ginny will be able to talk more about that. She's from Sault Ste. Marie, and she'll be able to add to that. We cross 3 bridges. We cross the Mackinac Bridge, we cross the International Bridge into the Sioux, and we cross the Portage Bridge that separates Houghton-Hancock way up in the northwestern corner, jutting out into Lake Superior, and separates also into the Keweenaw Peninsula. So 3 bridges. It takes us 7 hours to drive from the 2 farthest congregations, and that is Traverse City up to Hancock, up here, a 7-hour drive. And we all get together and we do it typically meeting somewhere in the middle or in the Sioux, somewhere around there. We are minuscule in numbers. We'll tell you a little bit how minuscule later. And so we have found the strength to work together. All of us who are presenting today are from the different congregations and we're all friends. Slide 3. Our history starts in Mackinac City with Michigan's first settler. I'm sure many of you have seen this monument made from the Jewish Historical Society of Michigan. It starts with the arrival of 1761 of Ezekiel Solomon, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. His early name was probably Solomon's, where an S may have stood for son of, but it eventually dropped. I'm going to actually call him Ezekiel because it's all in the family here. So I'm going to use first names, and I might even end up calling him Zeke, but that's just because I like nicknames. But you'll know who I'm talking about. He traveled with cousins and friends from Germany to Montreal during the 7-Year War in Europe, which was between Britain and France. And he came over to this country, which was not a country yet, during the French and Indian War, which was also coincidentally going on between Britain and France. So he left one war, he and his cousins and friends left one war and came to another one. In the whole area, they came from Germany to Montreal, where they set up a congregation and they went out in search of their fortunes. In 1761, Ezekiel and his cousin Gershon Levy established the Solomon Levy Trading House. Zeke went over to Michilimackinac, Gersh went into northwestern Ontario, and the rest of their group went farther west. They were all dealing with providing fur to the British troops at various upper Midwest outposts. And it was called, the literature talks about this as the upper Midwest, so I'm going to use that term. But it was really, at this point, it was British territory because they had won the French and Indian War. At the time, the history begins with this is all one region. There was no Canada, there was no Michigan, there was no Wisconsin. It was all one region that had been first settled by the French and then the British. But of course, the Native Americans were the residents and the primary population there. I'm going to refer to them as Indians, not to be politically incorrect, but because that was their identity as historians called them. Okay, life in a new country. Everything was going very well for the fur traders until 1763, when Chief Pontiac in Detroit decided to attack the British. And the Detroit attack didn't work out so well for the chief, but Fort Michilimackinac was a success. People were massacred and goods were destroyed. Amazingly, Ezekiel made it. He was captured. He survived. When the British took over, he was released and he started to rebuild his fortune. In 1764, he and his cousin reopened their business, and they built a summer house and a stable at the fort. This move, I would like to make note of this. This move distinguishes Ezekiel Solomon as the first Jewish summer resident in Northern Michigan. So not only was he the first Jew to come to Michigan, but he was also our first summer resident. In 1769, he married Louise Dubois. They had at least 5 children, although there's mention of more, so it might have been maybe 12. Of their legitimate children, they were raised as Catholics. This will play itself. In 1778, a son died, and he was raised in the Catholic faith. Nevertheless, Ezekiel requested burial at the Montreal Synagogues, which was Sheret Israel, established 1750. His request was granted because he was a synagogue's co-founder, leader, and benefactor. So he had some clout in his synagogue. In 1779, the British Lieutenant Governor decided that Fort Michilimackinac was not the safest place to have a community, and he began a relocation. He ordered relocation to a more defensible part on Mackinac Island. And then in 1781, Ezekiel and his family moved full-time to Mackinac Island. Sometime in the 1800s, nobody really is quite sure when, he died on Mackinac Island, and he was buried in Montreal. Okay, let me go to the next one. Here's a little story about his children, and you can read these slides. I'm not going to read because you can. Probably the most significant of these slides, of this particular slide, is his children were raised Catholic. They became fur trader. They fathered children with lots of women, that would, indigenous women. They married local white women and moved on various places. Sometimes they may have been coerced, sometimes not. But the most important thing for our purposes is this was the end of the Jewish identity for the Solomon family. So while he was our first Jewish resident in Michigan, his line stopped then. And a little epilogue on this. The main point here is that his descendants survive to this day. They are continually connecting via Ancestry.com and also by blogs. I was able to read one of their, some blogs where they're connecting with each other. Some still live in Northern Michigan or Ontario. Others, of course, are scattered all over the place. So that's the end of his story, but I did find a little bit of information on other Jewish traders. And I'm just going to briefly mention 4 in the interest of time. These are the only ones I found any information on, actually 5. Well, anyway, Jacob Franks came from England to Montreal, to Wisconsin, to Mackinac Island, to Drummond Island, where there was another outpost. And his son Jacob followed in his footsteps, but he went into Canada and into what became Canada and traded through the Hudson Bay. Their descendants scattered to larger cities, as far as I can tell from what I read. 2 families from Germany, the Leopold and the Austrian families, not their real names, by the way. They changed their names when they came here. Both from Germany. They went into shipping. They became related through marriage. And and they eventually ventured out to the far reaches of the Upper Peninsula and into Canada. So I'll show you a map later. Eagle River, Eagle Harbor, Calumet, and Hancock are all in the Upper Peninsula. And we have a temple there. We have Temple Jacob. So probably the most interesting one that I found was a guy named Edward Cantor. He was a brilliant adventurer who arrived in Detroit at the age of 20, came from a very well-to-do German family. He had a very circuitous route through New Orleans. He went on to Mackinac Island, evidently stayed there and created a successful business and political career through marriage and good fortune. And little else is known about him. Okay, let me do this. Okay. That was the first wave. And then after 1850, from Western and Eastern Europe, Jews settled across both peninsulas because they wanted to escape the pogroms. Small settlements, Traverse City, Alpena, and Petoskey, eventually grew into some of the oldest congregations in Michigan from the Orthodox tradition. I'm going to switch to the next slide. Some Jews were attracted to farming, and that was because they couldn't own land in the old country, and they could own land here, and that was very exciting. They tried their hand at it with the help of the Jewish Agricultural Society and Rabbi Levi of Congregation B'nai Israel, Abraham of Chicago. The two notable families that went into farming were a family called the Franzblaus, and I didn't check them out further. They created an apple orchard in Manistee Township, and the Cahotis family, who many of you have heard of and may even be related to, of Russian extract, who formed a retail produce business that eventually expanded into growing. One thing I learned was that they grew in Manistee, which I noticed is the Northwest Lower Peninsula, about an hour and a quarter south of Traverse City. As far as I know, there's very few, if any, Jews are there now. And the Cahotis family is absolutely significant in Northern Michigan Jewish history, particularly in the UP. How we survived. The Jews survived very much in the same way we still survive in Northern Michigan. They became acclimated to their communities. They built relationships with everybody in the community, Indians, Christians, interfaith, whatever they needed to do, they built relationships. They began businesses and service careers to support the mining, the lumber, shipping industries, and they thrived as community and political leaders. Jews built communities, as we still do. They were peddlers and merchants, dry goods, department stores. Moses Blumrosen, from a banker in Manistee. You guys know of Winkleman's in Detroit. I used to shop there when I was a little girl. They were in Manistee and St. Ignace. They were actually members of our congregation of Temple B'nai Israel. And some stayed here, some went to Detroit. There's still descendants that are living in the area now. Another family that is known in Detroit, the Salsons, who might be on too and have relatives, Shepsel Salson, was in Grand Marais and St. Ignace, attended U of M, studied engineering, married Bertha Blumrosen. I assume she was from Manistee, and they settled in Detroit. Okay, here we're getting into the maps. The early Jewish communities, there were 8 Jewish communities with synagogues by the early 1900s. And we'll talk about some of them, but not all. And then there were 3 other Upper Peninsula communities that did not have synagogues at the time by the early 1900s, but they were definitely Jewish communities and gathering places. I put this little map on the side to show you where people are. We've mentioned Eagle River and Eagle Harbor jutting out into Lake Superior right at the tip. Calumet had a greater population than downstate at one point, and there had been discussion of it becoming the capital of Michigan way back when because of the mining boom. There's a synagogue in Hancock. Here was Ironwood. Marquette was a community. Here's Ontario, here's Wisconsin, Menominee, Marinette, Iron Mountain. These are different places where there were Jews. Petoskey, Traverse City, Alpena, and I showed you where Manistee is. The communities that closed, these were the ones where the synagogues did not make it because people left and they could no longer support the Jewish communities could no longer. Ironwood and Hurley, Wisconsin, Iron River, I don't know very much about those. Escanaba, as far as we know, there are no Jews in Escanaba, but we're not sure. We just don't think so. Menominee, Marinette, I think you might hear about them in a couple of weeks, along with Iron Mountain. Jim Zaks and a group, Jim's on this call, will be speaking about Iron Mountain and that congregation, which closed a couple of years ago, but he will tell you a lot about that. The ones that survived. Congregation Beth Shalom in Traverse City, Temple Beth El Alpena, Temple B'nai Israel Petoskey, Temple Jacob Hancock, Congregation Beth Jacob, Sault Ste. Marie, and their congregation is located in Ontario. That makes us the international group. And Temple Beth Shalom in Ishpeming and Marquette, currently in Marquette. And you will hear all about those. Here's my map as to where we're located. And here's just a little bit of congregational facts. In that huge area where we live, in our 6 tiny congregations, we have, as best as we can tell from our member numbers, we have about 260 member units divided on 6 congregations. We are tiny. We range from 9 to 92. We also have figured out that we're about 200 unaffiliated members in our 6 congregations. That includes professors and students. We have 3 universities in our region. They're all in the Upper Peninsula: Lake Superior State University in the Sioux, also called Lake State, Northern Michigan University in Marquette, and Michigan Tech in Hancock. All of our communities have community colleges. All of our communities have medical centers, and we're all located on a Great Lake. I'm going to stop here, but I can come back to this later if need be. And so I'm going to stop sharing and turn you back over. Okay, a little bit. Okay, am I back?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Okay.
And next up, we have Ellen Ivanson.
Well, I'm here, but let's see if I can get, hold on. Uh-oh. All right, I'm gonna have to come in again. Just a second. There we go. Okay. All right, I'm Ellen Ivanson. Let me share my screen. There we go. And I have lived up here since 1970, been a member of the congregation up here since that time. So I'm going to give you all the information that I know from that time onward. But before then, we have a wonderful book that we compiled for our centennial that has a lot of the information before then. This book was written by Sharon Alderman from Detroit, who was a sister of one of our shul members, Barry Levine. And she did the writing, but the research was from descendants of our 3 earliest settlers. These women were from Detroit: Devera Steinberg Stocker, Bess Alper Deutsch, and Naomi Buchalter Flosch. And we have to give them tremendous thanks because they did so much information gathering for us. In fact, Devera, I think, wrote several articles for your Michigan History magazine. So now we're going to go to a picture of the temple, the way it looks today, with any luck. Just a second. There. Okay. So that's how it looks today, which actually is pretty much how it looked when it was built.
Ellen, you're not sharing your screen, so we can't see it.
Uh-oh. Hold on. Just a second. Okay, now I'll share my screen. There. And, okay. Can you see it now?
No, not yet.
Ah. All right, so I open for Zoom.
If you click on share screen and share your desktop, we will be able to see it.
Well, I'm trying. Let's see. Okay, so now you can see me.
Right.
We can
Okay.
see you. We just cannot see the
Right.
synagogue tour.
All right, let me try that share screen. Does it show up or not? Still doesn't?
No.
Uh-oh.
No.
All right, hold on a minute. All right, so presentation, office, launch meeting from Zoom.
Ellen, I saw a message that says host has disabled shared screen.
All right.
There you go. Now you're sharing, Ellen.
Now I'm sharing. Now I think I have to get back into my
In the meeting.
360 though. Uh-oh. I don't think it's there anymore. Hold on. Oh, this is too bad.
We're in your email account.
Right, right. I want to go back. I've got to go into to bring up the 360 again. That's what I want. Okay. I'm sorry, this was all set up and then oh. Maybe it's not this one.
I like being on the spot.
Synagogues. Okay. Well, I'm looking for how to get in here. No, I don't want to do that. Maybe I should just go ahead and just talk about it. And then if I can find it, I'll bop in at the end. Let me do that because I don't see it on my screen anymore. So I'm just going to talk about it. Oh, here's a synagogue search. Come on. Come on. All right. Okay, here we go. We're on the trail. In case you want to do this, this is a wonderful way to see synagogues all over the country. All right. City, go. There we are. All right. With any luck, you can see this now.
We can see it. Thank you.
There. Okay. So anyway, this is the way the synagogue looks today. And it's a very simple two-story building with gable, clapboard. Perry Hanna, the founder of Traverse City, was a Chicago lumber baron and found a wonderful place to set up his sawmill on Grand Traverse Bay. A lot of our lumber went to rebuild Chicago after the 1871 fire. He was a very civic-minded individual. He donated land to the Hebrew congregation at that time and the neighboring Congregational Church. And this was on the banks of the Boardman River. And you can see in the picture to the left, our stone building is the Congregational Church, which is now the district court today. And in the background is our courthouse. On the right-hand side of the shul is the parking lot, and right over to the right is the Boardman River. So we are right downtown in back of the Park Place Hotel area on a street called Bethel Way. It looks pretty much the same as it did when people came to the area in the 1800s. Now, our first settlers came in 1868. They were Julius Levinson, who went to Sutton's Bay, Julius Steinberg, who went to Traverse City here, and Solomon Ellstein and to Elk Rapids. And there are still descendants of him in that area. They were pack peddlers, and they went to the lumber camps and the Native Americans. They were all, these three men were from Suwałki, Russia, Poland at that time. They did very well, and they opened up dry goods stores in our whole area. Steinberg had the store downtown in Traverse City, and he built on top of his store the second opera house in Traverse City and the movie theater a little farther down the street, which today is the State Theater. So if you get a chance to walk into the State Theater when they're open, you will see some historical pictures of the movie theater. They were also the first trustees of the shul, which was built in 1885 as an Orthodox congregation with a woman's balcony and a mikveh in the basement. One of the members, Avram Greenberg, was related to Sir Moses Montefiore, the most famous British Jew of the 19th century. And to celebrate Montefiore's 100th birthday, he asked the congregations all over the world if they wanted him to do something for them. And Avram wrote and said, "We need a Torah." So that's how we got our first Torah. During the turn of the century, we had quite a little community up here, but rabbis were still pretty sporadic. We had our answer, Abraham Rubiner. He was a cantor, a shochet, a moil, and a Hebrew teacher. And our book details life in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. There were enough kids at that time to have a Sunday school. And in the 50s, we started a summer student rabbi program with students coming up from New York and Cincinnati. So we changed from an Orthodox congregation to more of a conglomeration of a Jewish congregation. In 1970, when I came, there were 10 Jewish families, and I was the youngest of 23. But soon there were other young families that came and joined us in appreciation of the beauty of the area. In 1977, we had our first big celebration in October of that year. The shul became a state historic site as the oldest synagogue in continuous use in the state of Michigan. There are older synagogues, but there aren't synagogues any longer. And you can see we have in our picture there, the state historic marker on the right-hand side. That's when I contacted your society and we began the search for our history. The celebration included a ceremony in which Cantor Hal Orbach was very instrumental, and the Posner family of Detroit, Seymour, Muriel, and Gail, were very instrumental also in helping us get this whole thing rolling. We were also honored to have Governor Bill Milliken at that celebration. In the 1980s, we had enough kids to start a Sunday school again, and we started to do our outreach to our local community and the Jewish community outside of Traverse City. In 1985, our centennial was our huge celebration, big weekend with all sorts of festivities and the first edition of our book. In 2007, we had our 120th celebration, another big weekend with lots of festivities, and we updated our book. One of the many families who left their mark on our shul was Julius and Ginny Belfour. In 1970, they moved from Boston here to be with their son and became everybody's Bubby and Zadie. They donated a beautiful stained glass window. Jenny made Torah covers and curtains, and they donated an amazing Czech Torah from the Holocaust. Hold on one second. In 1997, Ahavat Shalom, an offshoot of our shul, started. And actually, about 4 years ago, we merged again to become Ahavat Shalom. Beth from Bethel, Beth Shalom. Beth from Bethel and Shalom from Ahavat Shalom became Beth Shalom. However, today you will still see the Bethel signature on our building because it's a historic site. There are 86 family units and 62 prospective members. We have a monthly rabbi in Arnie Sludelberg, a retired rabbi from Shir Tikva in Troy, who we originally trained as a student rabbi in 1982 and 83 and 85. So we've sort of come full circle. So now, with any luck, I can give you a tour of the inside of our shul. Here we are. This is the entrance, and you can see, let me go back just a little bit here. Okay, you can still see the women's balcony we turned into an apartment for our student rabbi so they would have someplace to stay. The inside looks pretty much the same way it was. We've done some remodeling, but color-wise and wainscoting and windows are really about the same, and the doors, of course, these were modern seats. There were not these seats. When I came, we had the old velvet-colored seats from the Trabe Theater of Julius Steinberg. There was no carpeting at that time either. I'm going to move us along a little bit more to the other end where these are the original windows. This was an outside door. We now have an addition to the back, which is a handicap accessible. So we have an elevator and a second bathroom and a way to get down to the social hall in the basement. And you're going to see now coming into sight the way the bima was. Actually is pretty much the same as it was when it was constructed. These are original glass windows on both sides of the bima. This is the original glass in there. I'm going to move it up just a little bit so you can see the stained glass window. The round one was a gift by Julius Steinberg, our first president and trustee. The Torah curtain was made by Jenny Belfour, and the flags came when we had our state designation. All right, and now we're going to go around a little bit more. Here's the other stained glass window. The chair has been there forever. It was there when I was there, when I first came. And I'm going to move us along just a little bit more to see the Belfour window. This was constructed by an artisan in Suttons Bay, Michigan, designed and placed and donated to the shul by the Belfour family. So we're going to go around to the end and back to our entrance. There is a Tree of Life sculpture in the entryway, and downstairs we have our social hall, library, and bathroom where the mikveh is. So that takes you 135 years in about 10 minutes. And I'm going to pass it off now to Ken.
Thank you, Ellen. And we'll pass it off now to Ken of Alpena, Michigan.
There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ken Diamond from Alpena, from Temple Bethel. I happen to be the president of Temple Bethel in Alpena. First of all, let me thank the Jewish Historical Society of Michigan for hosting this event. I grew up in Detroit as a young kid, moved to Mount Clemens, where I went to school and graduated and all that good stuff. I've lived in southeastern Michigan most of my life. Moved up here as a retirement home, built in my home in 2003, and have been a member up here at Temple Bethel. Temple Bethel in Alpena, as you saw on the map, is the only synagogue east of I-75 from Bay City to the Upper Peninsula. This is a distance of about 180 to 200 miles. We are an oasis of Judaism along the shores of Lake Huron. Our mission is to maintain our historic synagogue as a place of worship and Torah study for Alpena and surrounding area residents, and to develop and maintain a strong Jewish presence in our community. Our long-term mission is to perpetuate Jewish tradition through education, social activities, and life cycle events. Beginning in the 1850s and 60s, the boom of the logging industry and the advent of the maritime shipping brought an influx of Jewish settlers to the Alpena area. In 1875, the Hebrew Benevolent Society of Alpena was formed. Led by Julius Myers, its purpose was to establish a synagogue or a cemetery for the Jewish community. It still exists today. The original markers are still on the gates, as you can see on the screen. I hesitate to say it's still an active cemetery. People, when they pass, we held funeral services there. After, go back to Julius Myers, who was the leader of the Hebrew Benevolent Society, and went after the funding and building of the cemetery. There's still a store in Alpena that bears his name and is operated by his descendants. After the cemetery, the Hebrew Society focused on organizing a synagogue. In 1891, they purchased an existing building and moved it to its current location at 125 East White Street. The story behind this building was it was originally built on the request of the wife of a lumber baron in Alpena for a religious sect, non-traditional religious sect called Perfectionists. After the building was built and the Perfectionists had occupied the building for a while, the leader of this sect was asked, and I put those words in quotation marks, to leave the city because he had some spurious relationships with the women in the community. So the building was then put up for sale, and the Hebrew Benevolent Society bought it for $1,100. It was moved to its current site, as I said, in 1891. The Jewish population grew for years, filling Temple Bethel for Sabbath, holidays, bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, weddings, funerals, and social events. Over the next 80 years, membership had dwindled, however, to a handful of members. The Jewish youth, as Carol said earlier, were being drawn to the larger, more metropolis areas. The aging of the remaining congregation members and the changing local economy all contributed to the decline in our membership. At one point in time, there were even discussions about closing the synagogue and giving it to a local museum. However, Temple Bethel managed to persevere, And today we are a very small congregation, 17 families. Most of us are eligible for membership in the AARP. Many of us are on Social Security. However, we do have several younger families, but only 2 have children, 2 years and 1 with 2 months. But we're continuing to grow our new memberships. When learning of the synagogue in Alpena, people often respond, "We didn't know there was a synagogue in Alpena." There is no permanent rabbi, so our services are mostly led by lay leaders who do an outstanding job. Our small congregation makes these services more intimate and more inclusive. Here's a picture of our sanctuary. When the COVID restrictions were applied this year, we had to postpone our visiting rabbi program this year. This program from the spring into the fall is sponsored by a Ravitz Foundation grant and allows rabbis to come to Alpena, lead services, and present a program to the community on Jewish traditions, beliefs, and culture. These are well attended by the local clergy, their congregations, and community leaders. We hope to restart this program next year, assuming that the restrictions are removed. Also, with COVID came the expanded use of Zoom, hence we're here today. We're very blessed and grateful to several synagogues for inviting us to join their Zoom services and Torah study meetings. Within the last couple of months, we have again started holding in-person services at the synagogue, wearing masks and social distancing. During the spring, summer, and fall, these services are held twice per month. During the winter, the services are once a month, depending upon weather conditions. We do get a little snow and ice up here.
Ken, the picture didn't come up
Which picture?
of the inside of the synagogue.
This one?
We're still seeing the gates, Ken.
Still seeing the gate?
Yeah, to the cemetery.
Can you see the,
Now, we can see the outside of the synagogue now. We could see the inside a second ago.
okay, I'll come back to the inside. Let me just mention that this window up the top is the only thing that was changed on the exterior of the building, where we put a stained glass window of the Star of David. Can you see the interior now?
We can.
Good.
Yes.
So this is our sanctuary. The back here is a rabbi's study and bedroom. We have a basement. Originally, the building was on a Michigan basement crawl space, a basement dugout, and that's now our community center, kitchen, bathrooms are downstairs as well. This is our main stained glass window. It's at the very front of the building. We're currently awaiting funding from the federal government to replace the plexiglass on the outside for clear plexiglass and also shatter resistant to preserve this stained glass window. Okay, so let me put up our contact information. We invite you to come up north, take a ride up US 23 north, or give us a call or an email. We'd love to give you a tour of the facility. Come up to the land of lakes and lighthouses, shipwrecks, bald eagles, bear, deer, all kinds of course, summer sports, winter sports, and extremely friendly people. Come visit and attend services at Temple Beth El. You might like it enough that you'll decide you want to stay. For more historical information on Temple Beth El, watch the video on the Jewish Historical Site website. Thank you. And I'll now turn it back to Carol.
Ken, the number that was
Okay.
given, is that your phone number?
I should be able to pick up here.
Hang on, Carol, just a second. Let me answer your question. Yes, that's the phone number for the shul.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And slideshow, play from start. I am with Temple B'nai Israel in Petoskey, current board member, former president, former sisterhood. When I was asked to get involved with sisterhood, it seemed strange to me that such a small place should have a sisterhood. And so we actually changed our name from sisterhood to a mishpacha. So we now have a mishpacha coordinator, and it's all geared to families. But the sisterhood had a major role in our history. I'm giving you some dates here. Here's our early temple history. We are grown out of Alpena, actually. A peddler named Samuel Rosenthal arrived from Alpena with his family. Made a couple of visits, went back to Alpena, came back, and started a store here called S. Rosenthal. His son Alec went away to college, came back, joined him, and they became S. Rosenthal and Sons. And this was a premier women's retailer. That was in 1875. In 1879, enough people had moved in to establish a minyan at people's homes. Our earliest families were the Frymans, the Wellings, Sandelmans, Greenbergs. There was another Rosenthal family that actually had another store in Harbor Springs. The Feldmans, the Lamperts, the Hellers. Those were some of the earliest founders, and I probably left somebody out, but Alec's wife, Minnie, began to do a home-based Sunday school even though they had no children. She very strongly believed in Hebrew education. The congregation in 1896, so about 17 years after the minyan, the congregation became founded as the Hebrew Benevolent Society. And they met at a rented hall in 1909. They became incorporated as Beth Israel Congregation. And in 1911, we purchased our current home from Parr Memorial Baptist Church, which bought the land across the street and built a church. Like some of the other congregations, we're kind of on a church corner. We have one corner. The Baptists, who have now moved to another place, had a second corner. Across from us on the other side is the Christian Scientists, and then the Catholics in our four corners in Petoskey. This was our original building in 1911. And what strikes me is how similar the buildings are from Traverse City and Alpena and this one. We are one of the oldest in continuing operation, except we've been in this building since 1911. I think Traverse City is the first congregation, Beth El, as it was incorporated, was the first in Michigan. Alpena's number 2, and then it goes on. Now, many renovations later, here we are. So we went from this to this, and we're on a corner in a residential neighborhood. Here is our sign on the corner, Temple, with, well, it speaks for itself. And this, I'm actually going to try my hand at Synagogue 360, because we don't have one. You'll see inside it's not as smooth. But this gives you a view of where our current temple is. That's our sanctuary. There's our door, and here's our social hall. This is the old building, and we moved the door over, built a foyer in between, and that's our social hall. And that's where we're at. Okay, I want to stop this. Now we go inside the sanctuary, and I'm going to start on our bima. We have a member, Jay Bavers, who is a stained glass artist. You will see the windows all the way through. They are our pride and joy. They have been part of our latest renovation, which was, well, until the current renovation. This was in the late 1990s, early 2000s. We expanded by buying the house next door and turning that into the Onek house, which then became our social hall, and the house behind us that became our rabbi house, which you will see later on. I can do a little tour here. So there's the door where we walk in. The foyer is right behind it. And here are some of our stained glass windows. Celebrating seasons, they're all donations. And of course, that's how we raised our money to make our renovations. Let me go to the next one. I couldn't figure out how to do this without losing my balance. So I did the best I could. But here's our congregation. We see probably about 80.
From the jaws of got it before he would.
And now we're back into our bima. We have musicians. We play when we have services. Of course, we've had no services this summer. And this, I think, would be our last slide, kind of going through. That's the Sukkot window. We sell cards with these windows on them. They're really gorgeous. In fact, they have attracted some attention for visitors. Here's our ark and our window above it. And then we're back. And that's basically a tour of the inside. I want to go over into our social hall. So we have the sanctuary, we've got the foyer. Now we're in the social hall. The social hall, I don't have good pictures of because it's filled with our new project, which is we have rebuilt. We are in the process of rebuilding. We tore down and are rebuilding our rabbi house and have had major fundraiser on that. We are about 2/3 of the way through, and Maya and Menachem, our Israeli summer rabbis, who we could not have here this summer, unfortunately, but we've had them for Torah study. You are about to see your new house for next year. So I was going to send you these, and then I thought, well, if they don't show up for here, I'll show it to here. But these are two of our newest stained glass windows. The other ones are all spoken for. They're just not made yet. Our social hall probably seats about 80 tightly, can stand about 100. It's for our onegs, it's classrooms. We have 3 dividers that we divide into our classrooms. This is Torah study. This is Jim and Betty Line, who I know Betty is on. Some of you guys might know Jim and Betty. He's got a son-in-law named Rabbi Aaron Starr from Sheretz Tzedek, and his daughter is Rebecca Starr. So here they are at Torah study. I did warn Betty, who is on and helping to keep time, that they were going to do it so that you could at least see a little bit of our social hall. This over here is one of our folding pocket doors, our kitchen, and there we have it. This is the back of our congregation. And you can see that's our social hall. Here's our kitchen, the foyer, and into the sanctuary with our old, here's our old part where the original building also went downstairs and had the social hall. Now it's used for storage. But that's what we are. And so I want to do this because here is our new rabbi house, and it faces, this is the back of the house. it faces our temple, and you can walk directly across the pathway onto our patio and into the social hall. And here is the new doorway with parking here and walking in. I wasn't able to get in to show you, but we are very, very, very excited. It is built by a member, Steve Johnston, who he and his crew also did the previous building for us of the social hall. And it's built green, and we expect it to outlast all of us, because it's really stunning and it's very, very exciting. Here's a little bit more temple history. I'm going to use the Rosenthals as an example, but I could actually use any number of people. Alec and Minnie raised their niece, Irene Goldstein, in Petoskey. And Irene was notable because she and Ernest Hemingway were tennis buddies, and they were friends. She married Joseph Gordon in Chicago. They had two daughters, divorced. She returned to Petoskey with her girls, took over the family store, Rosenthal's, after Minnie's death. And she managed the store until 1962. Very, very typical for Northern Michigan Jews. Irene was very active in the community. I see I was quick on some of this. Helped to establish the Historical Society, was honored for her work, was very well regarded, and just a tremendous presence in the community and in our temple. She died, I believe, she was over 100 years old, may have been 107. I had the pleasure of meeting her when I first came. Her daughters were Henriette Gordon Kaplan and Gloria Gordon Levine. And I'm going to talk only about Gloria for now because she's got the Detroit connection. She and her husband, Jean, who she met at the temple, he was visiting, raised 3 daughters in Mount Clemens. One of the daughters, many of you might know, is Trudy Weiss, living in Farmington Hills. Gloria is still alive. She's in her early 90s. She is wonderful and lives full-time in Sarasota. I spoke with her while I was putting this together to see what she wanted me to include. So here are a couple of landmarks. 1910, Zalman Freiman's bar mitzvah, the first one. Somewhere along the way, the sisterhood was created. Minnie Rosenthal was the first president. She was also the first vice president of the Michigan State Sisterhood, and she remained sisterhood president in ours until 1943. Evidently, she was a force to be reckoned with because she just accomplished amazing, wonderful things. If you can imagine, in 1923, we started out as Orthodox and then gradually moved into Reform Judaism. I think we were conservative for a while, then became Reform. As early as 1923, there was a convention of the Hebrew Union College, which trained the students in Charlevoix. That was the inception of the student rabbi program. According to our congregation, Minnie had kind of put the bug in somebody's ear there, who was one of the deans or the leader of the HUC, to say, we need student rabbis. Up to that point, we had used anybody we could find. So Rabbi Eugene Blacklegger was the first in 1925, and he served for 2 summers. Here's the thing that makes Temple B'nai Israel unique. We are a year-round congregation, but our big influx is the summer. And for many years, we were the only congregation within HUC that had a summer rabbi. We competed with students going to summer camps. And we still, it is still our big population. We've got a lot of summer people, and they support us. When people come to visit, and come to their Northern Michigan homes, they want a place to come to. Detroiters have been a major source of pleasure and financial health for our congregation. In the 1930s and 40s, I learned from a member, Rosalind Goldstick, who was really an incredible member of ours. Her husband had grown up in Charlevoix. That there was a years of member stagnation. In fact, they were afraid of closing. There were kids very much. Sisterhood helped to keep them going during the time, helped to keep the temple going through their rummage sales. I remember the rummage sales. When I first moved in, I started coming in the year 1999 and 2000. But I remember the rummage sales. They were huge. 1943, we had the first Benot Mitzvah with Gloria Gordon and Shirley Fryman. And then in 1965, we became B'nai Israel Congregation. We also call ourselves Temple B'nai Israel. And now, just very quickly, student rabbis. None of the congregations have a full-time rabbi. We are all completely volunteer run. We do everything, and all of our congregations are a one-stop shop for our Jewish communities. We are everything for everybody, and we are all volunteers. And that's one of the most wonderful thing about living in Northern Michigan. It's also one of the most frustrating things, because if we don't do it, we won't survive, and we are all very much aware of that. So, student rabbis for the high holidays, we have a student rabbi 1 weekend a month during the academic year, and we have student rabbis for summers for 8 weeks. It so happened one of the summers that I was president, my first summer, HUC, they had a new rule. They had gotten a grant. Their students weren't available. I was informed, and I informed the board that we were not going to be able to have a rabbi that summer. And we were devastated because this really took away our summer. Well, as luck would have it, there was an Israeli rabbi, Rav Maya Leibovich, who was attending the CCAR convention. We had a wonderful member of our congregation named Sam Karf, who was a well-renowned rabbi, unfortunately recently died. He was there. They began to talk. She was on the verge of retiring. She has her own wonderful story. And she said, "This sounds very interesting." I got a call from one of the deans. He says, "I think we have a shidduch, but I'm not going to do anything." He put us in touch. Rav Maya and I began to communicate. We quickly started making arrangements with our treasurer, and lo and behold, Rav Maya and her husband Menachem came as our summer rabbi and our cantorial soloist, and they brought a spirit that is thrilling to us. They've returned every year until this year, but we have seen them every week on Torah study, and we hope to see them in 2021. Our current membership, 90 member units, about half of them are summer residents. Our religious school meets every other week. We are all volunteer. We have Purim, we've got community Passover Seders, we've got Hanukkah celebrations, and and we all train, and we have a member that trains our B'nai Mitzvah students along with our student rabbis. And I will stop here and turn it back to Kara, I think.
And we are going to turn it over to Susan Burack of Temple Jacob in Hancock, Michigan.
I have an unstable connection. Hello.
Do you need us to come back to you, Susan?
I have an unstable connection. I don't seem to be coming up.
Okay, why don't
you come back to me?
Why don't we come back to you? Ginny, would you like to take it? We can move on to Ginny from Congregation Beth Jacob and Sue Saint Marie.
That's great, Kara. Kara, are you on? Have you made me the host? I don't know whether anybody can see me.
Yep, we're good. You're sharing your screen.
All right. Just like thank you. I'm Ginny Cymbalist, and I am the current president of Congregation Beth Jacob in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. Congregation Beth Jacob is unique in that we are a cross-border community serving two sides of an international border, Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, and the surrounding areas of both. As early as the 1880s, just like in all the other communities, there were Jewish peddlers on each side of the St. Mary's River. Most of them came from Russia and Eastern Europe through either Montreal or Detroit. At that time, Sault, Michigan was 3 times larger than Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, 15,000 people and 5,000 people respectively. Oops, I'm sorry, I haven't started my slideshow. There we go. Okay. So this is our lovely little synagogue, and I'll tell you more about that later. Jewish peddlers, as I said, came from the late 1800s, the early 1900s. Pictured here is Isaac Davis, who started Davis Clothing, was later owned by his 2 sons, Murray and Saul. And Isaac was a very well-known member of the community. Isaac came from Russia. This is a picture of Davis Clothing Store pictured. Harold Wassa was just an employee, but Lily Mintz was the daughter of one of the founding members who worked for Isaac Davis. Isaac Davis himself, and then Vic Haft was another merchant in the area. The streets on both sides of the river, the main street, Ashman Street in Sault, Michigan, and Queen Street in Sault, Ontario, were lined with stores owned by Jewish merchants. Names like Davis and Torgov and Fishman and Garshowitz and Himmel, Gator, Cates in Sault, Ontario, Barish, Oberman, Jacobs, Mesereau, and Friedman and Coslow in Sault, Michigan. One of the first people to stay in Sault Ste. Marie, get out of the peddling and actually set up a business, was the Cohen family. Their first business was called Cohen's Clean Coal. They were into lumbering and wood, and was opened by Ben Cohen and his wife Esther in about 1902. The business is still in operation today. It later became Traders Metal, and then it's now Sioux Foundry, and it's owned and operated by Ben and Esther's grandson, Robert Cohen. On the US side of the river, Ben Oberman was one of the first merchants there. This is Ben Oberman pictured in front of his store. And I have to say, when I look at this picture, I see his grandson, Bill, who is now the owner and operator of Barish Brothers. Ben Oberman joined his brother-in-law, his 2 brother-in-laws, in the clothing business in Pickford, Michigan. Pickford's located about 24 miles south of Sault Ste. Marie. And it was such a thriving business that they changed. They went to the metropolitan area, the huge metropolitan area of Sault, Michigan, 15,000 people, and opened their store there. This is a picture of Barish Brothers as it was. There was a fire in the 1950s Then it burned down. It then was rebuilt, and as I said, is now owned and operated by Ben Oberman's grandson, Bill. After Algoma Steel was built in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, the population there really began to mushroom, and the numbers in Sault, Michigan remained very much the same. Now, Sault, Ontario is about 73,000 people. Sault, Michigan is still 15,000. In the early days, travel between the towns was dependent upon a ferry, or personal boats or canoes, or in the wintertime, walking across the ice in the winter. You can imagine that it was difficult for the communities to have a lot of interaction, but they did at any rate. There's a record of a small community in Sault, Michigan, and there were 2 congregations actually operating in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. The story goes that these were both very small groups of men. It was difficult to find a minyan. So when there was a Jewish salesman in town, they would rush to see who could get to him first so they could form a minyan. It took a long time for them to finally settle down and decide that it was time to work together. And in 1945, they actually, we built our synagogue, our present synagogue. There is a wonderful book written by a man named Morley Torgov, who is now a retired attorney in Toronto. Morley was born and raised in Sault Ste. Marie. His father, Alan, was one of the founders of the synagogue and was a merchant there. The book is called A Good Place to Come From. And Morley swears to this day that every story in there is the truth. I'm not sure all the members of the community agreed with that, but it's a delightful book if you get a chance to read that. It tells a lot about the history of Sault Ste. Marie. Jewish numbers stayed small in Sault Ste. Marie, but grew steadily along with the general population in Sault, Ontario. This is a picture of our synagogue, which was built in much the style of the synagogues that the people would have known in Russia or Eastern Europe, where they came from. It had its roots in Orthodoxy, as most of our communities did. The picture here. Today, we've never been affiliated with any one movement of Judaism, even though, as I said, the roots are in Orthodoxy. Today, we use modern conservative prayer books, and we're a fully egalitarian congregation. At the height of our population in the 1960s, our numbers were somewhere between 160 and 170 in the combined cities. Today, the active participants are about 45 to 60 in there. Whenever we have an event, feed them and they will come. And our actual membership is 22 units. The synagogue was a very active group, very well known in the town. There were active chapters of B'nai B'rith and Hadassah Witzo. Members of the Jewish community were highly respected and active in many local groups. For over 60 years, the men of our congregation held an annual invitational charity men's stag, selling well over 600 tickets to the general community for an event which donated funds to Israel and to many charities in the local community. There were scholarships given to all, to graduates at the local high schools. The women held huge rummage sales. As I said, we're very active with Hadassah Witzo. Jewish dinner raffles, performances of children's entertainers, art auctions, fashion shows, and events to offer honoring local women, and much more. The proceeds from these events went to specific projects in Israel. The men of the community became well known in the local sports world with their winning baseball and bowling teams called the Schmohawks. And here you see a patch of the Schmohawks, one of their jacket patches. And one of our members, Paul Cates, who was a championship golfer, was sent to the Maccabi games 2 different years. Most of the men served in World War I and II. Major Jack Cohen was one of only 5 Canadians who to be decorated with the Silver Star by the United States government. There was a very active Hebrew school classes for many years. And here you see one of them, 1957. One can only imagine the difficulties faced with getting students across the river for Hebrew school when you had to wait on a ferry and with the ice up in the winter time. The building of the International Bridge in 1962 helped to alleviate those problems. In the 1950s and 60s, many of the young families, as with other communities, moved to large centers, so the school was then disbanded. There was still bar mitzvah preparation for young boys, nothing for the girls at that time. And in the mid-1970s, a group of parents formed the school again. By the late 1980s, there was a need for an expansion to the building for activities and for classroom space. And although our student population is really down again right now, we have our learning initiative, our distance learning initiative sponsored by the Ledor Consortium, which works with the students from outlying communities, and through the internet we're able to connect with everyone. The last ordained rabbi there was Beryl Fishman. He died in 1956, and since then all of our services, except for the high holy days, are lay-led. For the Yom Tovim, we bring in a professional leader, the current leader and the one just previous to him. Both grew up in our CBJ community. In fact, the one is the granddaughter of Rabbi Fishman. This year, we're having to meet the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic by holding all of our services via Zoom. CBJ had its 15 minutes of fame a number of years ago. At some time in the 1950s, Rabbi Fishman got a telephone call and told his 3 boys to go to the Royal Hotel and pick up a man named Jan Pierce, who needed to say Kaddish for his father. Little did the boys know that who they were actually picking up was opera singer Jan Pierce, whose picture, davening from our bima, hangs in our community room. This was the beginning of a long friendship and lots of memories between Mr. Pierce and the older guard of our community. For many years, the deceased members of our congregation from Sault, Ontario were taken to Toronto or to other large centers for burial. It wasn't until the early 1970s that an agreement was made with the city of Sault Ste. Marie for a space, an area in Greenwood Cemetery to be designated for use by the Jewish community. The picture here is a picture of an area in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, that was donated, interestingly enough, in the Catholic section of Riverside Cemetery. It was donated to the Hebrew community.
Ginny,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt. Oh, now we see the picture. It took us a second. We didn't see the picture that you were describing,
Oh,
but
I'm
now
sorry.
we see it.
So this is an area that, as I said, was donated by the Catholics to the Hebrew community for burial. There are about 20 burials there, and most of them are young children, unfortunately, which is a sign of the times. Now, this is no longer an active section of the cemetery at all, and burials of anyone from Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan are done in Sault, Ontario. Through the years, leading a Jewish life in a small community, northern community, as you might imagine, it's not an easy thing to do. Not only did we have the difficulty with getting back and forth across the river with ferries, and then even now, it's not always an easy task to get across with the bridge. And right now, during COVID-19, we can't go across at all, which made preparing this a little bit difficult, having the fact that all of our records and our archives and everything are at the synagogue in Sault, Ontario. and I happen to be located on the Michigan side. But through the years, even with the difficulties, there's always been a positive side. Throughout our history, we've celebrated everything together, from religious services, symptoms and sorrows. And from the people that I can see in this picture, the Hanukkah program, which must have taken place in the early 1950s, because I do recognize people who are still in our community. We have become a very close group, like a big family. And with our friendship with the Lador-Vador communities, the others that are being highlighted here today, it's an even larger family. So although we're isolated in some ways, we're still very active. And yes, there still are Jews in the North. So thank you very much for this opportunity. If anyone has any questions, we welcome visits at any time when you can go to Canada again. If for more information, we do have a website, which is bethjacobsssm.ca. And also we are located on Synagogues 360, so you can get a nice view of our synagogue. Thank you and have a great day. Okay, I'll return to Kara.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ginny. Susan, are you able to work with your internet connection now?
I hope so.
All right, then we will go back to Susan.
I'm not sure why it is.
We will go back to Susan of Temple Jacob in Hancock, Michigan.
Okay, I'm Susan Burack from Hancock. I've only been here 35 years. Not sure if you know about bageling, but when I first came here, I bageled with Joanne Kelt-Simon. She had a Golda Meir poster.
Susan, I'm sorry to interrupt. We cannot see you.
Ah, I'm not sure what to do. Shall I try?
There, now we see you again. Now we see you again.
Okay, good. So she was eating a bagel for lunch and we connected. I was invited to Friday night dinner. As soon as I moved up here, I was made secretary of the congregation, worked my way up to president over the years. Every newcomer is embraced at Temple Jacob, and every visitor is welcomed. Our home, and as in other congregations, the peddlers came and became storekeepers. And I want to show you the cover of Hasia Diener's book. When the Jewish Historical Society of Michigan brought her to Detroit and advertised showing the book cover, I recognized that peddler is Isidore Gartner. His father is the one who Temple Jacob is named for. In 1910, there was a critical mass of Jews, and they had stores from Ontonagon to Ami. By that time, had contributed the most money to the fundraising. He died just before the dedication of the opening of Temple Jacob. So it's always been called Temple Jacob in his name, although it was incorporated as Adat Yisrael. So the first year it was standing room only. There was a rabbi, there was a kosher butcher in Hancock. And in 1913, there was a very significant miners' strike. And business evaporated for the storekeepers. I want to show you the Synagogue 360 of Temple Jacob. So can you see this?
I'm sorry, we can't see it.
What am I doing? Share. Now can you see it?
No.
Your screen is starting to share, so we just have to see if the internet connection supports you being able to show us.
That's not what it's
There we go.
supposed
Now
to
we can see it.
Yep.
We have the Synagogues 360 up now.
Sorry. That's not what it's supposed to be. Try to find this again. We don't know where they came from because the records of this
We seem to have lost her. We seem to have lost her.
So this is
Erin,
Risha
we are
Ring.
going to move on to, yep, sorry.
No,
Go ahead, Risha.
as long as you're there. I thought you were working with
Yes, I was having
Carol.
I was having a bit of technical difficulty with my computer. I apologize.
Okay,
We
you
seem
go
to have
ahead.
lost
I'll back up.
Susan. We seem to have lost Susan, so we are going to move on to Erin of Temple Beth Shalom in Marquette, Michigan. And again, just a reminder, if you have any questions, please submit them via the chat, and I will ask them to each of our speakers at the end of the presentation. So take it away.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me, first of all? Good.
We can
I'm
hear you.
Aaron Solnick. I've lived in Marquette since 1975. I'm a retired physician, and I'm really delighted that the Jewish Historical Society of Michigan has put this together for our 6 remote Northern Michigan congregations. Let me open up my slideshow here. Okay. So this is basically an outline of what I'm going to tell you, and I know that we've been some delays and we're getting a little bit long on time here, so I'll try to be relatively brief, which would be possibly a first for me, some people would say. First Jews in Marquette County around 1890, by historical record. The census of 1910, the United States Census, showed all of 638 Jews in the Upper Peninsula. So you can imagine that none of our synagogues were terribly large. By 1920, the Jewish community burgeoned, responding to the booming lumber and iron mining industries And just like all these other congregations, many were peddlers that moved into having various kinds of retail stores. By 1920, the Marquette and the neighboring Alger County were services and education. Rabbis were helping with these functions, initially Orthodox and then conservative, and later in the 50s now and continuing the Reform movement. In 1952, so you can see that from 1920 to 1952, when Temple Beth Shalom first started construction, in those 30 years, Jewish life was going on in rental halls, private homes, etc. In 1952, the construction of Temple Beth Shalom began, and in 1953, the building was in full use. Some of the names of the founding members of our congregation, at least at the time of the building, are names that are whose businesses and the families are still in the Upper Peninsula and still in the Marquette. Dubinsky, Getz, Narotsky, Hodis, Davidson, Fine, Lowenstein, and Persitz. That's just to name a few. We've had, one of the things that we've had is strong lay leadership in leading services and religious education, and this has been supplemented by affiliation with the Union for Reform Judaism and Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, mostly from the Cincinnati campus, and its student rabbi pulpit program. We've had usually a student rabbi, occasionally an ordained rabbi, but usually on the 10 days for the high holidays, and then on a monthly basis for about 8 to 10 more visits. Occasionally, we've been lucky and hit it off with a rabbi who liked us, a student rabbi, and we've had several of them that have stayed with us for 2 or 3 years. In order to have a second or third year rabbi, we have to go to every other week instead of monthly, and that's been fine. HUC has now changed its rules, so it's very hard for us to do that anymore. Many of our former rabbinical students keep in close contact with us. To this day, religious services and education, including B'nai Mitzvah preparation, are a joint lay clergy effort. Our 6 Northern Michigan congregations also use distant learning technology for joint children's education, and Ginny was instrumental in getting this started because so few Jewish children in at least a large school system like Marquette's that they think they're the only ones in the world. And this enables kids in religious schools all over Northern Michigan and the Upper Peninsula to get together, so as we're getting together today through technology. For several decades, there's been a shift eastward towards Marquette in the Jewish community, and that's because so many children have gotten college educations and moved to other areas where they could find jobs, opening up of many governmental and professional possibilities in Marquette, such as the larger medical center there, the university, Northern Michigan University, etc., have attracted that. So at one point, 2/3, 3/4 of our congregation were having to drive anywhere between 15 and 25 miles to get to services. And sometimes in the winter, as you can imagine, that can be a little bit dangerous. So we started looking around for a place to move in Michigan, in Marquette, Michigan. It took a while to find a suitable site, but finally, the building that was called Citadel, and when you see pictures of it, you'll know why they called it that. It was a 90-year-old building that had originally housed the Christian Science Church. And that congregation dissolved in 1967, and it served as a meeting hall and a rental area for events, and then was converted and cut up into apartments. We bought it, and at least a year and a half of renovation and reconstruction, we turned it back into a house of worship. Different religion, but nonetheless, it had a sanctuary, it had a social hall, had a library, and those were all reconstructed and regeared for our purposes. We moved to what you might call the main line area near downtown Marquette, and that put us in the midst of some of the old established churches, Episcopalians, Methodists, the Presbyterians, Lutheran, Catholic congregations. And it's been wonderful. They have been so welcoming, so encouraging. Our parking lot is very small, so when we have services, they let us use their parking lot. It's that type of thing. When we have our annual Holocaust Memorial Service, which is an interfaith service, which often 100 people, we only seat 70 according to the fire marshal anyway. So we hold it at St. Paul's Episcopal Church, which is just catty corner across the street from us. And then we host the reception afterwards. So let me show you a little bit of, this is the original synagogue building in Ishpeming on a cul-de-sac. And it is now a private home. We sold it, thank heavens, after we moved our congregation to Marquette. And you can see it's a relatively small building. Here is our new sign for Temple Beth Shalom, serving Marquette County since 1952. Our website is tbsmqt, templebethshalommarquette.org. So if you're interested in finding out more about us, or if you're planning a trip up to Marquette and want to go to services, be sure to look us up. Here's our building. As you can see, it's a beautiful neocolonial or neoclassic building. It's up on top of a hill, and so we actually have 3 levels. We have the upper sanctuary level, we have a handicap accessible side entrance, and then we have the basement as well. And you can see this is one of the churches over here. This is the Methodist Church, and these are all 100-year-old or more buildings. This is from our dedication, which was in on May 11th of 2018. One of the founders of our congregation, Willard Cahotis, his daughter Lynn married one of our first student rabbis, Sam Stahl. And Sam is now a retired rabbi in San Antonio, Texas, and he came and did our dedication, led our dedication ceremony. This is our side door, which is level and handicap accessible. Here's St. Paul's Episcopal Church, which I mentioned. Down that side street with our side door is the Presbyterian Church, and then over here is downtown. You can't see because we have leaves on the trees. Our social hall. We'll start in the bottom and work our way up. Has a complete kitchen here, and around the corner is another complete kitchen. So we were able to seat somewhere between 80 and 90 people in our social hall, and we usually average around 80 people, for instance, for our community Seder on the second night of Passover, and the food preparation can be done right here locally. Here's another view of our social hall. And here's a wall of many bar and bat mitzvahs and confirmation classes. During the 70 years of our existence, some of them have gotten waylaid, so we don't have all of them, which is unfortunate. But you know, we've been talking about how we have to do a lot of Jewish stuff ourselves because sometimes we get a little isolated. I'm going to just show you one instance. This is me before the beard. Noah Cooper was one of our students for his bar mitzvah. And that's usually a joint effort, as I stated, between the rabbinical students and lay people. It was in the middle of winter, and half of his family and the student rabbi got stranded in Detroit and couldn't get into Marquette. So I got drafted. Fortunately, I already knew the service because I was teaching it to him. But that's what we do. You make do. We did keep one of the apartments that we took down for rabbinical students or other visiting guests. It's right around the corner from the social hall. It has its own facilities, including a mini kitchen over here. And of course, they can use the large kitchen and refrigerator. There's always leftovers. And this is really nice to have, and it's a beautiful suite. In our refurbishing, we had to honor the fact that some of us are getting older, some of us are disabled, some of us, who knows, might become disabled. We had to put in a handicap lift for those 3 stories so that we have, this will take 2 people, including one person in a wheelchair. And as you can see, if you're handicapped, these steep steps are not going to be your cup of tea. Here is looking at our sanctuary from the foyer. And as you can see, this mezuzah on one, which is on one of the door jambs, entering the sanctuary, was actually made and presented to us by Martin Lowenberg, who's from Southfield and is a docent at the Holocaust Memorial Center. He was our Holocaust speaker several years ago. He made this for us and presented it to us. Here is looking from the bima out at the foyer. And here are windows. We took the stained glass windows, which were specially commissioned for the original Temple Beth Shalom, and had them mounted in the windows of our new synagogue. These were by Stanley Katz, an artist in New York, and each one of these is either one of the 10 Commandments, the Shmat, or Yom Kippur. And we have little brass plaques along here that explain what each one of them represents. We also took our pews from the old building and moved them here. We built a handicap ramp that leads up to the bima. We brought the menorah and everything else from the temple. One of our congregants, Armando Rees, whose wife Shannon is our current president, is rather much an artist. He has a degree in fine arts, and he designed this whole area of the bima. He actually created the doors of the ark and constructed this whole area in here, including the gold laminating of these pillars. This is a view looking at it the other way so that you can see the other windows. These Torahs are respectively 140 and 170 years old. They were 100 years old and 70 years old when, or more, when they were initially donated to the synagogue and had been brought over by some of the original founders from Europe. This is our library. You see these doors that lead off there, they lead to the library. This is where we hold board meetings. It can also be used as a classroom, just as we use our social hall as a classroom for religious school. It has some of our books. And then back again, this is where we live Jewishly. And that's our story, and we're all going to stick with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aaron, and thank you, everyone. We did have a few questions come in via the chat, and if our speakers are okay, I will ask them now. The first was, is there a Hillel on campus, or do students come to your synagogues? I know you had
Yes.
mentioned there are some community colleges and universities up there.
One of the reasons that we moved from Ishpeming to Marquette so as we could better serve the Jewish students at Northern Michigan University. And that's worked out quite well. We see them much more frequently.
Are any of the synagogues members of USCJ or conservative? I know that some of you had said that they're not affiliated, some are reformed.
We're affiliated with with URJ. We're members. Our congregation is a member congregation of Union for Reform Judaism, and our affiliation with HUC helps supply rabbinical students for us in Marquette.
Any of the
Congregation
other
Beth
congregations?
Kara, Congregation Beth Jacob, we consider ourselves conservative. Our leadership, our lay leaders are from the conservative background. Our high holiday leaders are conservative, and we do use conservative prayer books and Maxurim and Siddurim. However, we are not affiliated with any actual movement, trying to be everything we can to all Jews.
Another question that came through is how many Jewish inmates at the state prison, if any, are serviced by the Marquette community?
There's always a few, not always, there are frequently one or two Jewish inmates, at least that we're aware of, at what is sometimes referred to as Carp River College. And occasionally, some of the student rabbis really are motivated to service them. Some are not. We leave it up to them. One of the problems is the way state prisons work, and many prisons, is that you get a certain amount of time out of your cell. Certain mandatory activities that will get you out of your cell, like eating and recreation. But you can get additional time out of your cell by saying that you're a certain religion, and then when that religion has services or education, you get out of cell for that. And sometimes you can have like 5 or 6 different religions and get lots of time out of your cell.
Another question that came through regarding Marquette is, what was the building? Oh, sorry, yes.
Can I just answer in addition to Aaron? There were a number of prisons. There were a number of prisons south of Sault Ste. Marie at Kinchlow, the old Kinchlow Air Force Base. And my husband Gil and I did outreach with the Jewish prisoners there for about 30 years. They can actually, in the Michigan system, you can only be one religion at a time, but Aaron's absolutely right that You get people who claim to be Jewish and don't have a clue what it's about. However, we did have a number of Jewish prisoners that we worked with through the years, but all of them, or most of them, have chosen to go to prisons where there is a kosher kitchen. And there wasn't one up here. I'm not sure whether Marquette has a kosher kitchen or not. There was
No.
not the availability of kosher food for our Jewish prisoners, so there's no longer a Jewish group at any of those prisons.
Right. And it's interesting as to why there have been so few.
And just one more question. What was the Marquette building prior to 2018 when you moved there?
Pardon?
What was the building, the synagogue building that you're in now? What was it prior to 2018?
Oh, it was, it had been cut up into multiple apartments. And after that, and before that, it was a venue for receptions and parties, etc. But originally it was built as the first Church of Christ scientist. There was the Christian Science congregation, which was actually very active and very prominent in Marquette up until the 60s. And then it sort of faded and the congregation disbanded in 1967.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for coming this afternoon. This was a really wonderful presentation. If you enjoyed this virtual tour of all of our Northern friends and their synagogues, in 2022, as Risha has said over the chat, we are going to be rescheduling our Up North Fall Color Tour, and we'll be visiting these synagogues when we do that, which will be a really great experience to see all of these places in person. Again, we have some really exciting programs coming up. Please check out our website for many more beyond September. But September 14th, we have another Up North program about the synagogue, Anshe Knesset Israel in Iron Mountain, Michigan, as well as Jerusalem of Gold or Iron on September 30th. And we look forward to seeing you all very soon at one of our upcoming Zoom programs. And again, check out our website for a lot of great, exciting upcoming things, and to find out more about JHSM and see everything that we have on there about Michigan Jewish history. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.